The ache was a familiar tenant in my chest, one that had signed a long-term lease years ago and paid its rent in size. It wasn't a sharp pain, nothing so dramatic. It was a dull, constant pressure, a reminder of the space between who I was and who I pretended to be. For 4 years, that space had been shaped like Marcus Thorne, my coach, a man who moved with a kind of quiet gravity that pulled everything, including my sanity, into his orbit. My life had become a series of practiced motions: dribble, shoot, pass, nod when Marcus spoke, and pretend the low timbre of his voice didn't rearrange my insides. Loneliness was the gym after everyone had gone home. The echo of a bouncing ball the only conversation, the smell of sweat and floor wax a poor substitute for human contact. I lived in that echo. Then came the catalyst, disguised as an opportunity. The championships. We were good, improbably good this year, and the university decided to invest. They sequestered the entire team for a week at a remote training facility, a bubble of pine trees, polished wood floors, and crushing focus. No distractions. For everyone else, that meant no parties, no girlfriends, no skipping practice. For me, it meant a week of undiluted, 24/7 proximity to the one person who was the source of my own private, agonizing distraction. It was presented as a privilege. It felt like a sentence. The bus ride, there was a blur of bad music and loud jokes I didn't hear. My focus was 2 seats ahead, on the back of Marcus's head. The way his dark hair was cut short, clean against the strong column of his neck. I watched the muscles there shift as he turned to speak to the assistant coach. It was a stupid thing to fixate on, the mechanics of a man's neck, but that's where I was. My obsession was built on a foundation of such useless, intimate details. When we finally arrived and stepped out into the crisp mountain air, he gathered us at the entrance to the main lodge. He didn't shout. He never did. He just stood there, hands tucked into the pockets of his gray hoodie, and waited for the noise to die down. "All right, listen up," he said. His voice was just as I remembered it from every practice, every game. A low, steady rumble that cut through the chatter without any effort. It was a voice that suggested absolute control, not of us, but of himself. It made you want to listen, to lean in. He laid out the rules, the schedule, the expectations. Standard coach speak. But I wasn't just hearing the words. I was watching his mouth form them. The slight quirk at the corner that wasn't quite a smile, but held a hint of its potential. His eyes, a deep and unreadable brown, swept over us. When they passed over me, they didn't linger, but for a fraction of a second, I felt pinned. Seen. It was the same feeling I always got, a ridiculous jolt that was equal parts terror and hope. He was my coach. He was, by all accounts, straight. And I was an idiot, caught in the tractor beam of his steady gaze, a gaze that probably meant nothing at all. The first day of training set the tone for the week. It was brutal. Marcus pushed us harder than he ever had before. Drills until our legs burned and our lungs felt like they were full of sand. Sprints that left us bent over, gasping for air. Through it all, he was a constant, moving presence on the court. He didn't just direct, he demonstrated. He'd take the ball from a fumbling player and show them the exact footwork, his body moving with an athlete's economy of motion that was beautiful to watch. He was only 34, not that much older than some of the grad students on the team, but he carried himself with an authority that felt ancient. I spent that week as a scholar of Marcus Thorne. I learned the way a small muscle in his jaw would tick when a play went wrong. I learned that he chewed on the plastic cap of his water bottle when he was deep in thought, staring at the whiteboard as if he could will the X's and O's into a guaranteed victory. I watched him during team meals, how he listened more than he talked, his eyes moving from player to player, gauging the mood of the room. He had a way of making you feel like he knew exactly what you were thinking, which, in my case, was a terrifying prospect. My internal monologue was a constant, frantic scroll of analysis. He stood next to me during a scrimmage, his arm brushing mine as he pointed out an opening on the court. My skin caught fire. I missed the shot. He didn't say anything, just clapped his hands together once. "Reset," he called out, his voice betraying no emotion. But I felt it. Or I imagined I felt it. A flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance? Disappointment? Or was it just the reflection of the overhead lights? My life became a highlight reel of these non-moments. I'd replay them in my head at night. lying in the narrow dorm bed that smelled of pine, cleaner, and regret. I'd dissect every word, every gesture. When he said, "Good hustle, Leo," was it just a generic encouragement, or was there a different weight to it than when he said it to Kevin, our star forward? When he adjusted my shooting form, his hand settled on the small of my back, warm and firm through the thin fabric of my jersey. It was a simple, technical correction, a coach coaching his player. But his hand stayed there a second too long, a breath too long. The pressure of his palm was a brand, a point of heat that lingered for hours. I could still feel it when I tried to sleep, a phantom touch that made the lonely bed feel even emptier. I told myself it was nothing. It was the forced intimacy of the training camp, the high-stakes pressure of the coming game. I was projecting my own pathetic yearning onto a man who was just doing his job. A man who had probably never had a single thought about me that wasn't related to my free throw percentage. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, during a water break, I'd look up and find his eyes on me from across the gym. He'd look away quickly, his expression unreadable, and start talking to the assistant coach. It happened enough times that I started to think I wasn't crazy. Or maybe I was just getting crazier. One afternoon, I was the last one in the weight room, trying to work out the nervous energy that had taken up permanent residence in my limbs. I was on the bench press, struggling with my last rep, my arms shaking. Suddenly, the weight lifted. I opened my eyes and Marcus was there, spotting me, his face just inches from mine. His expression was focused, his brow slightly furrowed. "Don't lock your elbows," he said, his voice a low murmur that was somehow louder than the clank of the weights around us. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap, mixed with the smell of the gym. It was grounding, intoxicating. "Sorry, coach." I managed to breathe out, my heart hammering against my ribs for a reason that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He helped me rack the weight, his hands brushing mine. Another one of those touches. Electric, accidental, meaningless, meaningful. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, stepping back. He wasn't looking at the weights. He was looking at me. His gaze was intense, analytical. "You're in your head." "I am. I live there. Just want to be ready for the game," I said, the lamest, most generic athlete response I could think of. He nodded slowly, his eyes still holding mine. "The game isn't one here, Leo. It's one up here." He tapped his temple with his index finger. Then he turned and walked away without another word, leaving me with the ghost of his scent and a heart that refused to slow down. He saw me. He saw that I was struggling, that I was a mess of anxiety and overthinking. And for one terrifying, exhilarating moment, I felt like he wasn't just talking about basketball. The days bled into one another, a montage of sore muscles, tactical diagrams, and my silent, obsessive observation. The tension in me was a string pulled taut, humming with a frequency only I could hear. I watched him laugh with the other coaches, a rare, unguarded sound that made my stomach flip. I watched him meticulously tape his own fingers before demonstrating a drill, his movements precise and practiced. These were the things I collected, tiny treasures of a man I couldn't have, hoarding them in the quiet, lonely corners of my mind. The third night, after a particularly grueling practice where we'd all been sloppy and out of sync, the mood was sour. Dinner was a quiet affair. Marcus barely touched his food, his jaw set in that way I'd come to recognize. I felt a knot of guilt in my stomach, as if our team's poor performance was a personal failing on my part. After the meal, everyone scattered, eager to escape the heavy atmosphere. I was heading back to my room when Marcus's voice stopped me. "Leo." "My office." It wasn't a request. My heart dropped. I was sure I was about to be reamed out for my sloppy passes, for the shots I'd missed. I followed him down the quiet hall to the small, temporary office they'd given him. It smelled of stale coffee and whiteboard markers. He didn't turn on the main overhead light, just a small desk lamp that cast long shadows across the room, making it feel more intimate, more conspiratorial. He gestured to a chair opposite his desk, and then sank into his own, running a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. The sharp lines of his face seemed softer in the dim light. For a moment, he wasn't Coach Thorne, the unshakable leader. He was just a man, tired and carrying the weight of a dozen other people's hopes. "Close the door," he said quietly. I did, the click of the latch sounding unervingly loud in the silence. I sat down, my hands clasped between my knees to keep them from shaking. I waited for the lecture. Instead, he just sat there, staring at the blank screen of his laptop, the muscle in his jaw working. "That was a mess today," he said finally, his voice flat. "Yeah," I agreed, my own voice barely a whisper. "Sorry, coach. I was off." He finally looked at me, and his eyes weren't angry. They were just tired. "Everyone was off," he corrected. "It's not just on you." The silence stretched again, thick and heavy. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, breathing in the coffee-scented air, hyper-aware of him, of the small space that separated us. "I want to show you something," he said, turning to his laptop. He clicked a few times, and the screen flickered to life, showing game footage from our last match. I was reviewing this earlier. He wasn't looking at the whole team. He had isolated plays, my plays. He showed me a clip of me making a solid defensive stop, then another of a perfect pass that led to a basket. "You see that?" he asked, pausing the video. "That's instinct. You're not thinking. You're just playing. You're a smart player, Leo. One of the smartest I've ever coached. But your brain is your own worst enemy. You get in your head, you start second-guessing, and you hesitate." He turned from the screen to look at me again. The lamp cast a warm glow on one side of his face, leaving the other in shadow. It was the longest he had ever looked at me directly, the longest he had ever spoken to me about something so personal. This wasn't about the team. This was about me. "What are you afraid of?" he asked, his voice soft, almost gentle. The question hung in the air between us, a grenade with the pin pulled. Afraid of? I was afraid of everything. Afraid of missing the winning shot. Afraid of letting the team down. Afraid of graduating without a plan. Afraid of this crippling crush that was eating me alive. Afraid that if I told the truth, to him or to anyone, my entire world would implode. Afraid that he could see right through me, that he already knew. I am afraid. This is what I want to say. I'm afraid of this, of sitting here with you in the dark and feeling like I could dissolve. Instead, I shrugged, a pathetic, jerky motion. Failing, I guess. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I had the distinct feeling that he didn't believe me, that he knew it was more than that. He seemed to search my face for something, and in that moment, the professional boundary between us felt dangerously thin. It was just two people in a quiet room, the air thick with unspoken things. "Failing is part of it," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "What matters is what you do after." He leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the desk. "I need you on that court on Saturday, Leo. Not the one who's overthinking every play. I need the one who just plays. I need you. I need you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Logically, I knew what he meant. He needed his point guard. He needed a player to perform. But my illogical, starved heart heard something else entirely. It heard a confession disguised as a coaching tactic. It was insane. It was hopeless. But in the dim light of that office, with his dark eyes fixed on me, it felt real. "Okay, coach," I whispered. "Okay." He nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Good." He leaned back in his chair, and just like that, the moment was over. The intensity receded, and he was Coach Thorne again. "Get some rest. We've got an early start." I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. "Good night, coach." "Marcus," he said, his voice stopping me at the door. I turned back. He was still watching me, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Call me Marcus," he repeated quietly. "When it's just us. Just us." My heart picked up a frantic pace. I nodded, unable to form words, and slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind me. I leaned against the cool wall in the empty hallway, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Just us. It was a line drawn in the sand, a redefinition of the space between us. And I had no idea what it meant, but it terrified me and thrilled me in a way I had never felt before. The ache in my chest was still there, but now it was accompanied by a terrifying, fluttering companion. Hope. The next 2 days were a blur of heightened awareness. The world had sharpened its focus, and the center of it was Marcus. Every interaction was now filtered through the lens of that late-night conversation. Just us, the phrase echoed in my mind. When he spoke to me in front of the team, he was coach, his voice was crisp, professional. But when we were briefly alone, grabbing water, stretching on opposite ends of the court, he would catch my eye. A small nod, a slight, almost imperceptible smile. And in those moments, he was Marcus. The shift was subtle, a secret language only the two of us spoke. Or maybe, once again, it was just me, writing a novel in my head based on a single sentence. The tension was building, not just for the game, but inside me. I was playing better. He had been right. He'd gotten into my head, but instead of adding to the noise, he had somehow quieted it. His belief in me, or what I perceived as belief, had become a shield. I played with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. My teammates noticed. They clapped me on the back, told me I was on fire. I would just nod, and my eyes would instinctively seek out Marcus. He'd be on the sideline, arms crossed, watching. He wouldn't be smiling, but there was an intensity in his gaze that felt like a physical touch, a silent acknowledgement that said, "There you are." The night before the championship game, the coaches organized a team bonfire, a last chance to decompress, to bond before the battle. We sat around the crackling flames, the scent of pine and wood smoke filling the cold night air. The mood was light, a nervous energy crackling beneath the surface of the jokes and laughter. I sat on a log slightly apart from the main group, nursing a bottle of water, watching the flames dance. I was watching Marcus, of course. He was standing, talking to the assistant coaches, the orange light of the fire catching the sharp planes of his face. He looked relaxed, but I could see the underlying tension in the set of his shoulders. He felt the pressure as much as we did, maybe more. His gaze swept around the circle, and, as it so often seemed to do, it landed on me. He held it for a beat longer than necessary before turning back to his conversation. A current passed between us, a silent question and answer that I couldn't decipher. Then it happened. One of our forwards, a guy named Rick who had a mouth bigger than his talent, started telling a crude story. It culminated in a punchline that involved a derogatory slur for gay men. A few guys laughed uncomfortably. The night air, which had felt so charged with positive energy, suddenly felt sour and cold. I flinched, my whole body tensing. I felt my face grow hot, certain that every eye had turned to me, the quiet guy who never talked about girls. Before anyone else could react, Marcus's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold as ice. "That's enough, Rick." The laughter died instantly. Rick looked stunned. "What? It's just a joke, coach." Marcus took a step forward, out of the shadows and into the full light of the fire. His face was a hard mask. "We don't use that language on this team," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. It was far more intimidating than if he had yelled. "Not here. Not ever. Is that understood?" Rick, suddenly looking like a chastened child, mumbled, "Yeah. Understood, coach." "Good," Marcus said. The word was a dismissal. He didn't look at Rick again. Instead, his eyes moved across the fire and found mine. He held my gaze, and in that moment, it felt like he was speaking directly to me. There was no pity in his look. There was something else. A fierce, protective glint that made the air rush from my lungs. It was a look that said, "I've got you." It was a look that shattered the last of my pathetic defenses. It wasn't just in my head. This was real. Something was happening between us. The bonfire broke up soon after that, the easy camaraderie gone. I couldn't stand the thought of going back to the loud dorm. My mind was racing, replaying that look over and over. I needed air. I needed silence. I found myself wandering over to the gym, which was dark and empty. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside and made my way to the bleachers, the cavernous space echoing with a profound silence. I sat on the cold metal, staring out at the court where tomorrow, our fate would be decided. But I wasn't thinking about the game. I was thinking about the look in Marcus's eyes. I don't know how long I sat there. 10 minutes. An hour. Time seemed to have stretched and warped. Then, I heard a soft footstep behind me. I didn't have to turn around. I knew who it was. The faint scent of wood smoke and something else, something uniquely him, preceded him. Marcus came and sat on the bleacher next to me. Not too close, but not far either. A respectable, coach-to-player distance that suddenly felt like an unbridgeable chasm. We sat in silence for a long time, just looking at the dark, empty court. The only light came from the moon filtering through the high windows. "You played well today," he said finally, his voice a low rumble in the vast quiet. "You're focused." I let out a short, humorless laugh. Focused is not the word I'd use for what's going on in my head right now. "You think too much," he said. It wasn't a criticism. It was a simple statement of fact. The same thing he'd told me in the weight room. "It's my defining characteristic," I replied, my voice laced with a bitterness I couldn't hide. Another silence descended. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, loaded with everything that had happened at the fire, in his office, over the past week. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear the soft sound of his breathing. I wanted to turn to him, to ask him what that look meant, to ask him what any of this meant. But the fear was a physical thing, a gag in my throat. He shifted on the bleacher, turning his body slightly toward me. "What Rick said," he started, then trailed off. "I'm sorry you had to hear that. It's not the first time," I said, my voice small. "It's the last time it will happen on my team," he stated, a note of finality in his tone that I didn't doubt for a second. I risked a glance at him. In the dim moonlight, his face was all angles and shadows. He was looking at me, his expression serious, searching. This is it. I can feel the moment balancing on a knife's edge. The air is thick with subtext. He knows. He has to know. The way he looks at me, it's not how a coach looks at a player. It's not how a straight man looks at another man. Or is it? Am I just projecting again, building a fantasy out of tired eyes and common decency? My heart is a frantic drum against my ribs. I have to say something. I have to break this unbearable tension. But my throat is closed. My mind is a blank slate of panic. He's the one who breaks the silence. His voice is even quieter than before, barely a murmur. "You're not alone in this, Leo." I don't know what he means. Not alone in what? In being on the team? In feeling the pressure of the game? Or in something else entirely, something bigger and more terrifying? My mind raced, trying to decode the words, the tone, the look in his eyes. He wasn't giving me anything easy. He was making me meet him halfway, but I was too scared to take the step. So I just sat there, paralyzed by a decade of silence, and said nothing. He held my gaze for another long moment, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, disappointment, maybe. Then he sighed, a soft, barely audible sound, and turned to look back at the court. The moment passed. The knife's edge was gone, and we were back on solid, separate ground. He was the coach. I was the player, and the chasm between us felt wider than ever. We won. I don't know how, but we did. The game was a fever dream, a blur of motion and sound, of sweat and shouting. I played on pure instinct, just like Marcus had told me to. My body moved without any conscious thought from my brain. I didn't have time to overthink. There was only the ball, the hoop, the court, the clock. In the final seconds, we were down by 1. The ball came to me. For a split second, the old panic flared. I could hear the roaring of the crowd, feel the weight of 1,000 expectations. I looked for an open man to pass to shed the responsibility. And then I saw him. Marcus, on the sideline. He wasn't yelling instructions. He was just looking at me, his expression calm, steady. It was a silent command. Shoot. So I did. I jumped. I released the ball, and for a moment, the entire world went silent. I watched it arc through the air, a perfect, beautiful curve. It went through the hoop without even touching the rim. The buzzer sounded. And then, chaos. My teammates mobbed me, screaming, lifting me onto their shoulders. The noise was deafening, a physical wave of pure joy and relief. I was laughing, shouting, caught up in the incredible, electric moment. We had done it. We were champions. The celebration moved to the locker room. Champagne sprayed everywhere, stinging my eyes, soaking my jersey. The air was thick with the smell of victory, a potent mix of sweat, cheap sparkling wine, and unadulterated happiness. People were hugging, crying, yelling. It was everything I should have wanted. But as the initial adrenaline rush began to fade, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was in the middle of the storm, but I wasn't part of it. The noise was too loud. The joy felt foreign. My own private turmoil, the unresolved tension of the last week, was a discordant note in the symphony of celebration. I saw Marcus across the room, being drenched in champagne by 2 of the seniors. He was laughing, a real, full-throated laugh that I'd never heard before. He looked happy. He looked free. And he seemed a million miles away. The secret, quiet world we had built in late-night offices and on moonlit bleachers felt like a dream. This was reality. He was their coach. I was just another player on his championship team. The ache was back in my chest, sharper this time. I felt suffocated by the noise, by the forced cheerfulness. I needed to escape. I slipped out of the locker room unnoticed, the sounds of the party fading behind me. I walked down the empty hallway, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, and found myself back in the gym. It was empty, silent, just as it had been the night before. The scoreboard was still lit up with the final score, a glowing testament to our victory. I walked to the center of the court and just stood there, breathing. The silence was a balm. I sank down to the floor, my back against the padded base of the basketball hoop, and finally let myself feel everything. The exhaustion, the relief, the joy of the win, and the crushing, overwhelming weight of my feelings for Marcus. A few stray tears traced paths through the grime and sweat on my face. It was too much. The victory felt hollow because the one thing I really wanted seemed more impossible than ever. I was so lost in my own misery that I didn't hear him approach. One moment I was alone, and the next, he was there, standing over me. I looked up, startled. It was Marcus. He had a towel slung around his neck, his hair still damp from the champagne. The loud sounds of the party were a distant, muffled roar. Here, in the gym, the world was quiet. He didn't say anything. He just looked down at me, his expression unreadable. I quickly wiped at my eyes, embarrassed to be caught like this. "Sorry," I mumbled, starting to get up. "I just needed a minute." "Don't leave yet," he said. His voice was quiet, but it stopped me cold. It wasn't a command from a coach. It was a plea. He didn't wait for a response. He came and sat down on the floor beside me, his back against the pole, our shoulders almost touching. He stretched his long legs out in front of him and let out a long, slow breath. We sat there in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of the game we had just won. The air between us was electric, humming with everything that had been left unsaid. My heart is hammering so hard I feel like he must be able to hear it. This is it. This is the precipice. I can't go back to the way things were. I can't spend another 4 years living in this silent, aching space. The win, the adrenaline, the raw emotion of the moment. It had stripped away my layers of fear. There was nothing left but the raw, painful truth. I turned my head to look at him. His profile is stark in the dim light of the gym, his jaw tight. He's staring straight ahead, at the opposite basket, but I know he's not seeing it. He's here, with me, in this bubble of silence. "I can't do this anymore," I whisper, the words tasting like rust in my mouth. They are inadequate for the enormity of what I feel. He turns his head slowly to meet my gaze. His brown eyes are dark, intense, searching. "Do what?" he asks, his voice a low rasp. "Pretending," I say, my voice breaking on the word. "Pretending that I'm okay. Pretending that that you don't, I can't finish." The words are lodged in my throat, a painful, tangled knot. My carefully constructed walls are crumbling, and I am terrifyingly exposed. I feel tears welling in my eyes again, hot and shameful. I expect him to say something, to get up, to put the distance back between us. I expect him to let me down gently, to tell me he's my coach, that I'm confused. I expect the final, crushing blow of rejection. Instead, he just watches me, his expression softening. He lifts a hand, slowly, as if not to startle me. He doesn't touch my face. He just gently cups the back of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. The touch is electric, a jolt that goes straight through me. It's not a coach's touch. It's not a friend's touch. It's something else entirely. "I'm not pretending either, Leo," he says, his voice so quiet it's almost lost in the vastness of the gym. And then he leans in. He closes the small space between us, and his lips meet mine. It's not a rushed, frantic kiss. There's no desperation in it. It's slow, deliberate, and breathtakingly gentle. It's a question and an answer all at once. His lips are soft, warm. I can taste the faint, lingering sweetness of champagne. The kiss is hesitant at first, a discovery, and then it deepens as I respond, my hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palm. This is real. It's not in my head. It's not a fantasy I've constructed from stray glances and accidental touches. It's Marcus, his hand on my neck, his mouth on mine. The ache in my chest, the one that has been my constant companion for years, finally begins to dissolve. It's replaced by a feeling so vast and overwhelming I can't put a name to it. It feels like breathing after being underwater for too long. It feels like coming home. The morning after was a study in jarring contrasts. The quiet, world-altering intimacy of the gym floor felt a universe away from the bright, chaotic energy of the team's departure. My head was a confused mix of exhaustion, disbelief, and a low-grade, humming panic. After the kiss, we hadn't said much. Words felt clumsy, inadequate. He had just held my gaze for a long moment, his thumb stroking my jaw, before he whispered, "Get some sleep." He had walked me back to my dorm, a comfortable silence settling between us, his hand brushing mine in the hallway before we parted. I hadn't slept at all. I had just replayed the kiss, the feel of his lips, the low rumble of his voice saying my name, over and over until the sun came up. Now, in the harsh morning light, surrounded by the boisterous shouts and laughter of my teammates as they loaded their bags onto the bus, it all felt fragile, like a dream that was threatening to evaporate. I saw Marcus near the bus, clipboard in hand, doing a head count. He was Coach Thorne again. His voice was crisp and authoritative as he gave instructions. He looked exactly the same as he had a week ago. Unflappable. In control. There was no sign of the man who had kissed me with such earth-shattering gentleness just hours before. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. What if it was a mistake? A product of the emotional high of the championship, a moment of madness we would both pretend never happened. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp clenching in my gut. I avoided his eyes, focusing on stuffing my duffel bag into the luggage compartment under the bus, my movements jerky and awkward. I felt like I was wearing my heart on the outside of my body, a raw, exposed thing, and I was terrified he would look at me with pity or, even worse, indifference. I kept my head down, my hoodie pulled up, trying to be invisible. I found a seat at the very back of the bus, pressing my face against the cool glass of the window, pretending to be asleep. I watched him as he did a final check, his silhouette framed in the doorway of the bus. He glanced down the aisle, his eyes scanning the rows of seats. For a split second, our eyes met. My heart leaped into my throat. His expression was unreadable. He gave a sharp nod to the driver, and then the bus doors hissed shut, separating us. He wasn't riding back with us. He was driving his own car. The dread intensified. He was creating distance. It was over before it had even begun. The bus ride back was torture. The guys were replaying the game, celebrating, making plans. I was trapped in a bubble of my own anxious silence, the triumphant noise grating on my raw nerves. Every bump in the road felt like a confirmation of my fears. It was a mistake. I had misread everything. I had taken a moment of kindness and twisted it into something it wasn't. The familiar shame and self-loathing started to creep back in, undoing the quiet joy of the night before. By the time we pulled back onto campus, I had convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing. We piled off the bus, a mess of tired, hungover, victorious athletes. We mumbled our goodbyes, our promises to get together soon. The team was dissolving, scattering back to our individual lives. The bubble had burst. I grabbed my bag, my only thought to get back to my dorm, to hide, to lick my wounds in private. As I was walking across the deserted parking lot, a car pulled up alongside me. A familiar gray sedan. The passenger window rolled down. It was Marcus. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice calm and even. I stopped, my heart doing a painful lurch. "I'm good," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. "The dorm is just over there." I gestured vaguely, not meeting his eyes. "I just wanted to run." "Leo," he said. His voice was softer now, losing its coaching edge. "Get in." It wasn't a request. I hesitated for a second, my internal battle raging. But the quiet authority in his voice won. I walked around the car and got in, the scent of his car, clean, leathery, with a faint hint of coffee, enveloping me. I shut the door, and the world outside went quiet. It was just the two of us again, in a small, private space. He didn't drive. He just put the car in park and turned in his seat to face me. I kept my eyes fixed on my own hands, which were twisting the strap of my bag in my lap. "Last night," he said, breaking the silence. "That wasn't just about the win." I finally looked up at him. His face was serious, his dark eyes searching mine. There was no pity there, no regret, just a quiet intensity that made it hard to breathe. "I know you're probably in your head about it," he continued, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. "I know you." He reached across the console and took my hand, which was cold and clammy with anxiety. His was warm and dry and strong. He didn't lace his fingers with mine. He just held it, a firm, grounding pressure. A reassurance. A promise. It wasn't a mistake, he said, his voice low and certain. Okay. All I could do was nod, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. The knot of fear in my stomach began to loosen, unraveling thread by thread. He held my hand for a moment longer, his thumb rubbing gently over my knuckles, before he let go and put the car in drive. He drove me the short distance to my dorm in a comfortable silence. When he pulled up to the curb, I didn't know what to say. Thank you felt laughably inadequate. Before I could stumble over my words, he spoke. Go home. Get some real sleep, he said. I'll call you. Okay, I whispered. I got out of the car and watched as he drove away. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the weight of my duffel bag forgotten. I could still feel the warmth of his hand on mine. I'll call you. It was a simple phrase, but it was everything. It was the promise of a future, of something more than stolen moments in empty gyms. The test had been my own fear, my own certainty that I was unworthy of this, and he had met it with a quiet, unshakable reassurance. I walked into my dorm building feeling lighter than I had in years. The next few days were a strange limbo. The euphoria of the win and the shock of Marcus's kiss faded into a quiet, anxious anticipation. I went through the motions of catching up on classes, of talking to my parents on the phone, but my entire being was focused on my silent phone. I jumped every time it buzzed, my heart leaping with a mix of hope and dread, only to be disappointed by a notification from a class or a text from my mom. My mind, my old enemy, started to work against me again. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe the reality of the situation had set in, and he had decided it was too complicated, too risky. The coach and the player, the age gap, the fact that our lives were so intertwined with the university. I spun out 100 different scenarios, each one ending with him never calling. The old ache started to return, a faint, familiar ghost in my chest. I had been given a glimpse of something wonderful, and now it was being snatched away. I was lying on my bed on the third day, staring at the ceiling and methodically listing all my personal failings, when my phone finally buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart stopped. My hands were shaking as I opened it. My place. 7. I'm making pasta. It was followed by an address. No name, no explanation. It didn't need one. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of barely controlled panic. I showered twice. I tried on 3 different shirts, finally settling on a simple gray t-shirt, telling myself to be casual, to not look like I was trying too hard, even though I was, desperately. The entire walk to his off-campus apartment was an exercise in talking myself out of turning around and running back to the safety of my dorm. His apartment was in a quiet, older building with a lot of trees. It felt lived in, settled. It felt like him. I stood outside his door for a full minute, my hand hovering over the doorbell, before I finally took a deep breath and pressed it. He opened the door almost immediately. He wasn't wearing a coach's polo or a university hoodie. He was just wearing a dark blue Henley and jeans. His hair was slightly damp, and he was barefoot. He wasn't Coach Thorne. He was just Marcus. He smiled, a real, easy smile that reached his eyes, and my anxiety melted away, replaced by a warm, liquid feeling in my chest. Hey, he said. You made it. Yeah, I breathed. Pasta sounded good. His apartment smelled amazing, like garlic and tomatoes and something else warm and inviting. It was neat, clean, but not sterile. There were books piled on a coffee table, a well-worn leather armchair, and framed black and white photographs on the walls that looked like places he had traveled. It was a home. Have a seat, he said, gesturing towards the small living room. I'm almost done. I sat on the edge of his comfortable-looking couch, feeling like an intruder in his life, but he seemed completely at ease. He moved around the small, open kitchen with a relaxed confidence, stirring a pot on the stove, chopping basil. It was so domestic, so normal, it felt surreal. We were just 2 people, about to share a meal. The power dynamic of coach and player had vanished at the door. He brought over 2 glasses of red wine and handed one to me. To the champions, he said, his eyes sparkling. To the champions, I echoed, our glasses clinking together. The wine was good, and it helped soothe the last of my frayed nerves. We ate at a small wooden table in his kitchen. The pasta was simple, and it was one of the best things I'd ever tasted. We talked. We really talked, for the first time. Not about basketball, not about strategy. We talked about our hometowns, about the stupid summer jobs we'd had, about the music we liked. I learned that he had grown up in Oregon, that he missed the rain, and that he had a younger sister who was a doctor. He learned that I was an only child, that I drew in my spare time, and that I had no idea what I wanted to do after graduation. The conversation was easy, flowing. He was a good listener, asking questions that made me feel like he was genuinely interested in my answers. And I found myself relaxing completely, laughing at his stories, sharing things about myself that I rarely told anyone. The man I had spent years observing from afar, idolizing and fearing in equal measure, was becoming real. He was funny and kind, and a little bit nerdy about old movies. He was even better than the version I had built in my head. After dinner, we moved to the couch. A comfortable silence fell between us. The mood shifted, the easy chatter giving way to the awareness of our proximity, of the unresolved business that hung in the air. He turned to me, his expression growing serious again. "Leo," he started, his voice low. "I know this is complicated. The coach thing, the team. I don't care about that," I said, maybe a little too quickly. He smiled, a soft, sad smile. "I do. I have to. But that doesn't change anything." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've wanted to. I've been aware of you for a long time. Longer than is probably appropriate." My breath caught in my throat. "You have. You're not exactly subtle when you're staring at someone," he said, a teasing glint in his eye. "But it wasn't just that. There's the quietness about you. A strength. I saw it from the first day you walked into tryouts." He looked down at his hands. I told myself it was nothing. "I'm your coach." It was a line I couldn't cross. But this week, being around you all the time, it got harder to ignore. He finally looked back at me. "That night in the gym," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't want that to be the end of this. I want it to be the beginning." He had made the choice. He had said the words I was too afraid to even think. He was meeting me more than halfway. He was crossing the entire chasm and standing right there with me. I didn't have the words to respond, so I just leaned in and kissed him. This time, it was different. There was no desperation, no frantic relief. It was slow and sure, and full of a quiet, profound joy. It was a confirmation, a beginning. We didn't do anything else that night. We just sat on his couch, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against his chest. I could feel the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat, a quiet drumbeat that seemed to say, "You're safe, you're safe, you're safe." He ran his fingers through my hair, and we just sat there, watching the city lights flicker to life outside his window. The quiet intimacy of the moment was more profound than anything I had ever experienced. It was a peacefulness that settled deep in my bones, a feeling of rightness, of belonging. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, the first pale light of dawn was filtering through the window. I was still on the couch, but Marcus had covered me with a soft blanket. He was asleep in the armchair opposite me, his head tilted at an awkward angle. A wave of affection so strong, it was almost painful washed over me. He looked younger in his sleep, the lines of stress and worry erased from his face. I lay there for a long time, just watching him breathe, memorizing the shape of his face in the gray morning light. The ache in my chest was gone. Completely. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel lonely. The space inside me that had been hollow for so long was now full, and it was full of the quiet, steady presence of this man. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He saw me watching him, and a slow, sleepy smile spread across his face. "Morning," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I whispered back. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what this meant or where we were going. He just looked at me with a warmth and an acceptance that answered all the questions my anxious mind could ever conjure. He stood up, stretched, and walked over to the couch. He didn't say anything. He just bent down and kissed me, a soft, simple morning kiss that tasted faintly of sleep and felt like a promise. "I'll make coffee," he said. And as I watched him move around his kitchen, the rising sun casting long shadows across the floor, I knew this was it. I had spent years yearning for a grand, dramatic moment, a lightning strike of love. But this was better. This was quiet. It was real. It was 2 mugs of coffee on a peaceful morning. It wasn't a finish line. It was a starting line. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I felt like I had finally, After a long and lonely journey, come home.